Most people think that they will find their purpose by following their passion. That's not how it works. Purpose usually shows up disguised as hesitation, as curiosity mixed with fear, as that thing that you keep circling but never actually choose. Let me show you how to spot it and what to do next. Because if you're waiting to feel completely certain before you move, you might be waiting forever. I've got 4 tips that will help you to discover your purpose. So let's start with the first one, which is this. I want you to reframe hesitation as a signal, not as a stop sign. Purpose does not arrive with. Reframe hesitation as a signal, not a stop sign, a marching band and a big green light. It doesn't show up labeled, "Congratulations, this is your destiny." It's much more subtle than that, and that's why most people miss it. Now, when something makes you hesitate, your brain interprets that as danger. Novelty plus uncertainty activates your threat detection system. That's just biology. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish very well between "this might expand my life" and "this might eat me." But here's what's interesting. The things that matter most to you will almost always trigger hesitation because they carry weight, they carry exposure, and they carry the possibility of failure or success, and both can be destabilizing. So we assume hesitation means wrong. Often it means this matters. Think about the things that you truly don't care about. You don't hesitate over those. You don't lose sleep over them. You don't circle them. You don't overthink them. You ignore them easily. Hesitation shows up when there's something at stake, when there's emotional weight, when there's the possibility that stepping forward would change something. And that's why hesitation isn't a red light. It's a green light wrapped in nerves. It's your system saying, this could alter your trajectory. Now, that doesn't mean that you act recklessly. It doesn't mean that every uncomfortable impulse is destiny. But if something keeps resurfacing, if you keep revisiting it in quiet moments, if you keep imagining yourself doing it and then immediately talking yourself out of it, that's not random, that's signal. So instead of asking, "Why am I scared?" ask, "What would happen if I moved toward this just a little?" Hesitation is often the doorway to growth. The mistake is assuming it's a wall. If something makes you mildly sweaty but also slightly obsessed, pay attention. If you keep returning to an idea like a career shift or a creative project or a conversation, a stage, a class, a risk, and you keep talking yourself out of it, that's not random. That's data. Hesitation is information. Okay, that said, let's move on. Learn to recognize the difference between fear and misalignment onto tip number 2. What I want to say at this point is that not all hesitation means purpose. Some hesitation is your intuition saying, this isn't for you. Other hesitation is your nervous system reacting to growth. Those are not the same thing. And if you confuse them, you either force yourself into things that drain you, or you retreat from the very things that would expand you. So here's a simple diagnostic. Ask yourself, does this scare me before I do it, but energize me after? Or does it drain me before, during, and after? Fear feels activating. Misalignment feels depleting. Fear says, what if I fail? Misalignment says, why am I even here? Let me give you a real-life example. When I was preparing for my TEDx talk, and this was months of preparation, there were definitely moments early on where I felt real fear, self-doubt, imposter thoughts. Things like, who am I to say this? Is this idea strong enough? What if I freeze? Standing up and articulating your core philosophy in front of a large audience of 1,000 people, and then eventually on YouTube for the world to see. That's vulnerable. There was hesitation for sure. Here's what's interesting. After every group rehearsal, I felt more energized. After practicing in front of other people, I felt clearer. And especially after the event itself, after stepping off that stage, I didn't feel drained. I felt massively aligned. It scared me, but it also strengthened me. That's growth fear. If something scares you, but leaves you more alive and more clear and more steady afterward, that's not misalignment. That's expansion. Now, compare that to staying in something that looks safe on paper, but leaves you depleted. You wake up tired, you perform, you go home empty. And so yes, you're hesitating each day, questioning whether you should keep going forward. That's not fear. That's friction with who you are. That's the misalignment that we're talking about. There's research in behavioral psychology showing that anticipatory anxiety decreases with exposure. In other words, the more that you lean into something that scares you, instead of avoiding it, your brain gradually learns it's survivable. In contrast, misalignment doesn't work that way. Chronic misalignment increases stress markers and burnout and emotional fatigue, cynicism. So the question isn't, am I scared? The better question is, after I do this, do I feel smaller or do I feel stronger? If your nervous system is loud, but your core feels steady, that's a clue. Purpose often lives there, right at that edge where you feel visible and exposed and a little uncertain, but quietly, right? Once you understand that distinction, you stop trying to eliminate fear. You start using it. So to sum up tip number 2, it's this. You need to learn how to recognize the difference between fear and misalignment. Now, if you're listening to this and realizing that you have been defaulting to safety, avoiding the things that make you hesitate, that's not a character flaw. That's just autopilot. And that's exactly why I created something called the Reset. It's a free 5-day challenge designed to interrupt autopilot patterns, those subtle ones. The ones that keep you circling instead of choosing. Small daily shifts, no dramatic life overhaul required, because you don't find your purpose by thinking. You find it by interrupting the patterns that are keeping you stuck. So if that sounds helpful, the link is below. It's free, and I would love to have you join me in the journey. Now, let's keep going. Follow the energy signature, because we are moving on to tip number 3 to help you find your life purpose. Here's the truth. Purpose leaves a pattern. It's rarely hidden in something that's completely foreign to you. More often, it's hiding in something that you already care about but haven't fully claimed. And sometimes you don't even notice it at first. You project it. So let me explain what I mean. And for this, we are going back to the thing that I was just talking about earlier, my talk on a TED stage. So a while ago, I became slightly obsessed with watching TED Talks. I loved the end format. The clarity, the distilled ideas, the stage presence, the power of one clear message delivered well. And I remember thinking, this is amazing. So then I started trying to convince my oldest son that he should do one. I knew he was a strong speaker. I knew he had some really good ideas. And I kept telling him how powerful it would be. And then one day I caught myself. Wait, why am I outsourcing this? If I think this is so compelling, if I'm this energized by it, if I can't stop watching these talks, why am I trying to hand it to someone else? That was a moment. Because sometimes the thing that you're trying to convince someone else to pursue is the thing that you secretly want permission to pursue. That's energy. That's signal. And I started noticing that this wasn't random. I would replay certain talks in my head later. I would analyze the structure. I would think about what I would say, not casually, intensely. That's not idle interest. That's pattern. If something keeps pulling you back, not because you should care, not because it's prestigious, but because you genuinely can't stop thinking about it, that's not trivial. Viktor Frankl argued that meaning isn't something that we manufacture out of thin air. It's something that we discover in how we respond to what life asks of us. Often, purpose feels less like, what do I want to do? And more like, what am I unwilling to ignore? For me, it was the idea of speaking, not because it looked impressive, but because I felt something when I watched those talks. Curiosity intensity, a kind of internal lean. And once I stopped trying to assign it to someone else and admitted it was mine, the path became clearer. Not easy, but clearer. So instead of asking yourself, what is my life purpose, which is overwhelming, ask, where does my energy reliably rise? What do I keep trying to give away? What do I light up about when no one is asking me to? Purpose leaves fingerprints, and sometimes you just have to stop pretending that they belong to someone else. So tip number 3 in a nutshell is to follow the energy signature. All right, now let's move on. Run micro experiments to tip number 4, because now you have the clues and you understand hesitation differently, and you can distinguish fear from misalignment, and you're noticing your energy patterns. But here is where most people get stuck. They wait for certainty. They wait for someone to confirm, yes, this is the right move. They wait until it feels safe. But that is not how purpose reveals itself. Purpose is not discovered in contemplation. It's clarified through action. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, live the questions. Now, that line is deceptively very powerful. You don't have to answer the question, what is my life's purpose today? You have to live into it, which means you experiment. If something makes you hesitate, instead of declaring, this must be my life's calling, or this must be wrong, run a small experiment. Teach one workshop. Apply for the opportunity. Start the newsletter. Volunteer in the area that scares you. Post the video. Take the class. You don't need a life overhaul. You need a Tuesday experiment. Clarity is earned through engagement and action. So tip number 4 is to run micro experiments. Because every time you move towards something that stretches you, you collect data. Did this drain me or did this expand me? That's how purpose becomes visible, not as a lightning bolt, as a pattern. Now, let's get more from me. Zoom out for a moment. The Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action." In other words, the obstacle isn't separate from the path. It is the path. That hesitation that you feel, the tension, the exposure, that's not a detour. It's information. It's pointing at something that matters. Purpose doesn't usually show up where everything feels easy and obvious. It shows up where there's friction, where there's something at stake. If you only move toward what feels completely safe, your world stays the same. But if you move thoughtfully and deliberately toward what makes you hesitate, you gather clarity, you build courage, you learn what fits, and over time, what once felt terrifying starts to feel natural. Not because it stopped mattering, but because you stepped into it. Purpose doesn't arrive fully formed. It reveals itself when you're willing to feel exposed, uncertain, slightly out of place, and you act anyway. And if you're realizing that what's really been holding you back isn't confusion about your purpose, but an old internal script, then the next video that you should watch is called The Hidden Script Running Your Life. Because often the reason that you're not stepping toward what matters isn't that you don't know. It's that you're still living inside a story that you didn't consciously choose. I will link that video on the slide. Next screen, and then I will see you there. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Oh man, is it Rilke or Rilke? How do you pronounce? Shoot, let's see. Well, no, I don't have time for this. I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it the way that I think it is. No. Do that again. And that was weird.